we have a serious discussion to get to today. But before we get to the serious discussion, I want to have a just for fun discussion. So here are your discussion questions. What is your favorite sport to play and why? And what is your favorite sport to watch and why? Now, I've watched baseball my whole life, and I happen to think that baseball is the best sport, at least in terms of history and storytelling. And one of my favorite baseball stories involves a curse they refer to as
The Curse of the Bambino.
And it involves the Boston Red Sox and the New York Yankees. Now, surely you've heard of a guy named Babe Ruth. The Sandlot is one of my favorite movies of all time, certainly top 5. Anyhow, the point is about Babe Ruth. So Babe Ruth was originally part of the Boston Red Sox. And the Red Sox were historically a very successful baseball team. They had won 5 of the previous 15 World Series. Well, in 1919, the Red Sox decided they wanted to sell Babe Ruth's contract to the Yankees for $125,000. Now, that was certainly a lot of money, and today that would be, so many millions of dollars. But the point is, the Red Sox had Babe Ruth, sold him to the Yankees. From this point on, several things happen. One, Babe Ruth becomes one of the best baseball players ever. Some still say best baseball player in the history of baseball. He hits 714 career home runs. The Yankees, they go on a tear. The Yankees have 27 world championships since that point. The Red Sox, the Red Sox kind of went in the tank. The Red Sox become one of the unluckiest baseball teams in history. From the point they got rid of Babe Ruth to the next time they even made it to the World Series, 25 years. And that World Series they lost on a really bizarre play. And the Red Sox fans started calling this the curse of the Bambino, because the Bambino is one of Babe Ruth's nicknames. I remember the next time the Red Sox got to the World Series, 1986. 1986, they're about to win. They're 1 out away from winning the World Series. Error on the first baseman, winning run comes around and scores. And the Red Sox lose, and of course they're blaming the curse of the Bambino. I wish we had never sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees. That started this whole thing. This was the Red Sox chant for years and years and years. Until 2004, 86 seasons after selling Babe Ruth to the Yankees. And the Red Sox finally had another real chance at winning the World Series. Now they have to beat the Yankees to get to the World Series, except now they're down already 3-0 to the Yankees. No team in history has ever come back from a 3-0 deficit to win that series. Well, enter David Ortiz. Big guy, his teammates call him Big Papi. David Ortiz, bottom of the 12th inning.
Ortiz into deep right field. Back is Sheffield. We'll see you later tonight.
Go on to win the next 3 games to beat the Yankees and get to the World Series, and they go on to win the next 4 games of the World Series. 86 years after they sold Babe Ruth's contract, the Red Sox finally won the World Series again, and the curse of the Bambino has finally come to an end.
Back to Folk. Red Sox fans have longed to hear it. The Boston Red Sox are world champions.
Last week we talked about the world being under a curse. We looked at the Genesis story and saw how Adam and Eve's sin, how they're going against God, put the world under a curse. And ever since then, people have been caught up in sin and its devastating effects, and eventually its end result, which is death. And how even the creation itself is under a curse, like perpetual winter in Frozen or in Narnia. Now, obviously, this curse is much bigger than what happens to a baseball team. But remember, I told you, the curse is not the end of the story. We need to get closer to the end of the story today. To this point, the world's story has been very much like a classic fairy tale. You have a villain, you have Satan as the villain who hates everything about God. You have a curse that affects everyone and everything. But remember this, God is the central figure in the world's story. The whole world is God's because he created it. It belongs to him. He loves it. But what about the curse? Who's going to break the curse? When will the hero enter the story? Is it too late? Are we all doomed? So for many years, the world suffers under this curse. And even God's people can't get it right. They turn away from him time after time. And then finally, an angel appears to a man named Joseph and says to Joseph, your fiancé will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. And everything changes. The hero is about to show up. The curse breaker is going to make his entrance. God himself is still the main character in this story, except now he's showing up as a new character, God as a man, as a little baby, and he will grow up and come to our rescue. And we've had this conversation about people who have changed the world. No one stands taller in this conversation than this man, Jesus. Jesus is born as a baby just like the rest of us, but then there's so much about him that's not like the rest of us at all. Jesus can turn water into wine. He can make the weather obey his commands. He can calm the storm, and it has to obey him. He stands up for the poor and the downtrodden. Even the powers of darkness have to obey him. Remember how the curse meant that we're subject to sin and death? Jesus starts forgiving people's sins. And then he goes to the cross voluntarily to take on the penalty for the sins of the entire world. He's breaking the curse of sin. And then he goes one step further, breaks the curse of sin, and breaks the curse of death. That's what the resurrection is all about. Jesus is crucified. 3 days later, he's alive. Death has been defeated. Paul says it like this, death has been swallowed up in victory. Jesus came to break the curse of sin and death. And no one has ever changed the world as much as Jesus did. Jesus changed the world so profoundly that the entire world lives by a calendar that's split into two parts. One part before Jesus, one part after Jesus. No one has ever changed the world like Jesus did. Now, some of you are already asking the big question. So if Jesus came to break the curse of sin and death, why do we still have to deal with sin and death? This is a really good question. I think we have to name 3 truths to get us to the answer to this question. The first one is this. The world is still at war because the enemy is still lurking. Here's Peter's description of this. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Now, to be clear, the completed work of Jesus on the cross and his resurrection, those are real. The curse is being reversed, but the enemy has not yet been banished from the world. You are correct if you have noticed that the world is still very much in a war between good and evil. And even though the enemy knows he's really already been defeated, he's so angry. He's lurking around. He's seeking whom he can devour. He's using lies and deceit in every way he can because his desire is to keep people in bondage to sin, keep them afraid of death. That's all the enemy really wants because the enemy is aware of truth. Number 2, Jesus doesn't force anyone to choose him. There's a story about Jesus that John tells in his gospel. And Jesus has just fed a whole bunch of people. And then he actually kind of calls them to account and says, here's what it would mean for you to follow me. You can get the details of this story out of John chapter 6. Anyhow, a bunch of people at that point decide, well, we were great coming here for the meal, but then they decide they don't want any more. They don't want anything that requires them to do something. And so most of them actually just leave and they're no longer following Jesus at all. And Jesus looks at his disciples and he says, well, what about you? Are you guys going to leave too? And Peter is the one who says back to him, where else would we go? You're the one who has the words of life. Jesus doesn't force anyone to choose him. He leaves that choice up to each person. Now, choice is the right word. This is starting to sound a lot like choosing sides, isn't it? Well, it should. That's exactly what it is. In this great war of good versus evil, God gives opportunity for each of us to choose which side of that we want to be on. So let's talk about this war for a few minutes. Let me give you this question for your discussion here. In what ways do you recognize this war of good versus evil? All right, here we go with truth number 3. Jesus recruits willing followers. From the beginning of his ministry, this is the way Jesus operates. He says to Peter and Andrew, come follow me. He says to James and John, come follow me. He says to Matthew, come follow me. He recruits a team of 12 guys to be the original team of curse breakers, even though they don't even know yet what they've gotten themselves involved with. And then he opens up this offer to the rest of the world, to anyone who wants it. He says it this way, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. I have to tell you, sometimes I wish that Jesus had just come and broken the curse with one swing, and the whole curse of sin and death would be over, like when the Red Sox win the World Series and the curse is over. But that's not what Jesus did. Peter says that this time between Jesus coming and then everything actually being set right is about God giving us a chance. Here's the way Peter says it. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. So part of Jesus' plan in allowing this time between the reversing of the curse and the completion of all that means is he's giving us a chance to repent. The other part of it is this. Instead of changing the world all at one time, Jesus recruited this team of followers to be a part of changing the world. Now, these original 12 guys, they lived with him, they traveled with him, they spent all their time with him for 3 years. And during this time, he was training them in all of the things that he wanted them to do for changing the world. And then before he left, he gave them responsibility for making more disciples. And he gave them power and said, now go and do the things that I've been doing. Go change the world. And this is finally where you and I actually come into the story. We, as followers of Jesus, are kind of like descendants of those original ones. We're in a line of people who are training and are trained to be world changers. We are part of a multi-generational, multinational, multicultural team called the church, a whole team of curse breakers, a whole team of world changers. Jesus was and is the greatest world changer of all time. And he has recruited us to join him. It's not just about personal forgiveness and making sure that I go to heaven instead of hell one day. It's about Jesus calling you and me to be world changers.